Releasing the Bragging Rights pay-per-view with Vengeance coming back for the first time in over a decade. Vengeance 2011 in October. To be honest with you, I don't know what to say about this. I think it's bad for business to be coming out with a game that is simply called WWE 12. If you're going to start putting numbers on video games, like we've seen THQ trying to do over the last number of years with Raw vs. SmackDown, and you're going to come out with a game for the first time ever called WWE 12 with such a simple title, why not call it WWE 1300? And the reason I'm saying that is because we can go back as far as WWF Royal Rumble and WWF Raw on Super NES for the Nintendo Entertainment Console and the Sega Genesis. Because there are so many different versions of a WWE, WWF game, whatever. I mean, I can even go back as far as to when I loved playing the original WWF In Your House for the PlayStation. It had an overloaded roster of talents. You could play as Ahmed Johnson, the British Bulldog, Bret Hart, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, the Ultimate Warrior, the original Shawn Michaels, an overloaded roster of talent, and Super WrestleMania was also something similar to that. But the thing about WWF In Your House and Super WrestleMania that made the game so successful was because it created the closest thing you were going to get at that point in time to the original WrestleMania arcade game. It created such a fantastic arcade game type feel that no game after it created. WWE All-Stars restored somewhat of a arcade type game feel, but not enough. And I think that those were probably the best days that we saw WWE games put out by Acclaim and other retailers. THQ presented what they believed was the next generation of WWE video gaming with voiceovers, storylines. The SmackDown video games, when they were just aptly named SmackDown, were the first video game pertaining to wrestling that introduced somewhat of a storyline element. And then every game after that followed that. And then along with the storylines, then they introduced voiceovers for the first time in '05. It's basically the same game every year with 2 or 3 new moves added to your move set, a couple of new storylines thrown in, and an updated roster. It's the same thing if you have an NHL video game, an NBA video game, an NFL video game. It's the same game every year with an updated roster and improved graphics a little bit and new commentary. It's just the same thing, same prototype, updated version. And I think that's what we've been seeing every year with the Raw vs. SmackDown video games, with 1 or 2 new match types added in, different storylines, and a couple of new superstars added to the roster, updated roster depending on how the draft goes each year. But it seems like WWE just used the Raw vs. SmackDown video game as an excuse to present a promotional event to promote it. No doubt the Bragging Rights pay-per-view paid dividends for the selling of the Raw vs. SmackDown video games, which vary each year depending on how good the video game is. I remember being absolutely overwhelmed and flabbergasted at how much of an advancement WWE Raw vs. SmackDown, the original one, was back in '05 from what we had seen previously from WWE video games. I mean, compared to Warzone and Attitude, released in the 90s for Nintendo 64 and the original PlayStation, I mean, these games, these Raw vs. SmackDown games that THQ were introducing, were absolutely phenomenal. The commercials, the promo packages, everything was just so overwhelming with the SmackDown game, and I was like, at such a young age, I have to have this video game. I'll never forget the original Raw vs. SmackDown commercial between Tori Wilson and Stacy Keibler, who got into somewhat of a brawl at a restaurant promoting the game. I think that commercial is still available on YouTube, and if you haven't seen it, it's worth your while to check out. I'd love to throw it up here as a YouTube video of the day for you to check out here on our website, and maybe we will throw that up there for you. And an interesting poll for us to conduct here on the website is, will you be purchasing the up-and-coming WWE 12 from THQ as they drop the Raw vs. SmackDown title, if indeed the rumors are true? I've enjoyed playing the Raw vs. SmackDown video games over the last 7 or 8 years, But to know they're not going to be producing them anymore and coming out with games like WWE 12, 13, 14, and a special video game each year for WrestleMania. WWE All-Stars is the latest special video game that they put out around WrestleMania time. Prior to that, we had Legends of WrestleMania, which was the closest thing I think we're going to get to Raw, WWF Royal Rumble, even back as far as WWF Steel Cage on Game Boy. I think that, WWE had a lot of competition from WCW when they used to release video games like WCW vs. NWO World Tour and WCW Revenge on Nintendo 64, and I think WWE realized then they had to keep coming up with new innovative ways to sell video games and stuff, and I think everything has come together eventually for WWE when they're putting together their promotional packages for video games and actually developing the video game. A number of wrestlers have commented on how fun of an experience it was having facials done for the video game, having photographs taken, doing the voiceovers. It's just a fun experience when developing a game, and footage of that is also available on YouTube. But I can remember playing the video games, being absolutely flabbergasted at the presentation of them, even back as far as WWF Warzone and WWF Attitude, which was the game that they released to promote the Attitude Era back in '98. I was such a huge fan of WWE video games. I'm not such a big fan as I was maybe 10 years ago. There was a point in time in my life when I think I had every video game release that pertained to WWE, and not only WWE, but WCW as well. I was such a huge fan of them, I had to have them, I pre-ordered them, I picked them up on the day they were released, and I played them to the point where I actually conquered everything there was to conquer in the video game, and after doing everything that the video game allowed you to do, I was sitting around reading it up on the computer, trying to find out when the next WWE video game was coming out just so I could play it. But now, it seems like the same type of video game is being released each year, with a special video game released around WrestleMania time, and the special video games turn out to be even better than Raw vs. SmackDown, because like I said, Raw vs. SmackDown is the same thing every year, with one or two new moves added, an updated roster, a little bit improving on the graphics done, and just the same thing over and over and over again. I mean, we've come a long way since the days of Acclaim video games for WWE. I mean, all we'd see from Acclaim were the original WWF Royal Rumble, WWF Raw. We never really got any type of advancements from the Acclaim video games, because back then video games with 2D graphics were amazing. But now, I think what we're seeing now, THQ is running out of ideas. I mean, every year, the biggest thing that will come from a Raw vs. SmackDown video game is the addition of matches. I mean, now in the WWE video games, you can have Money in the Bank ladder matches. You can have Inferno matches, casket matches, TLC matches. Back in the day, you were lucky if you could have a no disqualification match on Nintendo 64. So, I think that, the video games have improved a lot, but eventually what we're seeing is the same video game released over and over and over again. And a lot of speculation can come from THQ making this recent announcement that they're not going to be releasing a Raw vs. SmackDown video game anymore. Something similar to Raw vs. SmackDown without the competition element. I think what we're going to see is the first for THQ. A first for THQ for the first time in years. That hopefully pays dividends. I remember when they tried to change it up, and they had Raw vs. SmackDown vs. ECW released back in 2007 or 2008. I believe 2008 that game came out. It was Raw vs. SmackDown vs. ECW back in 2008. And that was a bit different. The whole concept of the game was this ECW invasion. Vince McMahon reinstates ECW, and you have to fend off ECW for a certain portion of the season before other storylines are implemented into the game. It was very interesting seeing the ECW superstars in a WWE video game for years, for the first time in years. So, every year something new is added to the game, but I don't think not enough new things are being added to the game every year. I'd love to be able to sit through a THQ business meeting and developmental meeting and creative meeting, whatever you want to call it, and see what kind of ideas are being put forth each year for the latest installment of Raw vs. SmackDown. Not enough impressing things since the original Raw vs. SmackDown are being added to the game. I don't know how you feel about it, but if you have an opinion on the releases of the Raw vs. SmackDown video games each year, maybe you've played the latest installment of Raw vs. SmackDown. I'm going to be flat out honest with you. I have not. If you have played any of the Raw vs. SmackDown video games over the last 7 or 8 years, if you've played the latest one, you can drop us a line on MySpace, Facebook, and YouTube. Our MySpace account is myspace.com/HCW Entertainment Radio. Send us your opinion on the latest installment of WWE Raw vs. SmackDown and the upcoming WWE 12 release. Our Facebook can be found by going to facebook.com, logging on there, typing in my name, Jonathan Clarke, and sending us your opinion along with a friend's request as it pertains to WWE 12 and the latest installment of Raw vs. SmackDown, which we have previously talked about here on the show. And our YouTube channel, where this video will be available, is youtube.com. The YouTube channel name you're going to have to try to find is Jonathan Clarke 22. Send us a subscription request, and you can also send us your opinion via email through YouTube or via comment on the up-and-coming WWE 12 video game release. MySpace, Facebook, and YouTube are just some of the ways you can find and connect with HCW Entertainment. And I'll tell you, the WWE 12 video game may create some deal of controversy about its release. I know a lot of people enjoyed Raw vs. SmackDown. They love the Legends games where you can play as people like the Ultimate Warrior and the original Rock and original Stone Cold Steve Austin. I know WWE All-Stars got over quite well, very significantly well, and I think that the up-and-coming WWE 12 video game is going to offer a little bit of differentiality and hopefully restore somewhat of an old-type feel to an original WWE video game, probably hopefully back as far as the original Raw or WWF Royal Rumble or even WWF In Your House, which was a big hit for me. Being able to play as the original Bret Hart, the original Shawn Michaels, the Ultimate Warrior, being able to play as those guys with an arcade type of feel was an overwhelming experience for me, and hopefully WWE 12 will have all those elements from the previous WWE video game releases and some new features as well. Like I said, don't expect much from WWE 12. I'm not expecting a whole lot because, I played virtually every WWE video game there is to play except the newer ones. And what I see each year, what I get from it, is an update